I met Emily when I was in college, and honestly, I thought she was the one from the start. She was gorgeous, confident, a little bitchy sometimes, but that was part of her charm. We started dating and everything seemed perfect until about 6 months ago. Small things started changing. She'd be on her phone more, texting someone but quickly hiding the screen when I'd walk into the room. I figured maybe it was just friends, nothing serious. But then she started acting distant, snapping at me over little things, and I caught her lying about where she was going a couple of times. At first, I ignored it. I told myself she was stressed from work or just busy, but I couldn't shake the gut feeling that something was off. We had plans for our wedding, and I was genuinely excited. I'd imagine us building this life together, planning the future, and all I could think about was how she'd been acting strange lately. I started paying attention, watching for signs. She was more secretive with her phone, sometimes would leave it face down on the table or hide it when I was near. She'd get texts late at night. Sometimes a quick reply, then delete the message. I brushed it off, convinced I was just paranoid. Then came the day I stumbled across something that changed everything. I was in our bedroom looking for my watch and I saw her phone lying on the bed. Out of curiosity, I picked it up and unlocked it with her passcode. I knew it was stupid, but I was desperate to see if I'd missed something. That's when I saw the messages. There were dozens of texts, mostly flirty and suggestive, between her and her best friend, Jake. I felt my stomach drop. They were talking about meeting up late at night, about sex, about how much they enjoyed each other. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My wife, the woman I was about to marry, cheating on me with my best friend. It was like my world was crashing down around me. I felt numb, frozen. I couldn't process it. I kept reading those texts, feeling every ounce of betrayal seep into my bones. I knew I should confront her right then, but I was too stunned. I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to understand how she could lie to my face for months about everything while she was sneaking around with Jake. It wasn't just a fling, either. It looked like it had been going on for a long time. The worst part was how she'd always been so bitchy and dismissive, always acting like she was better than everyone else. Turns out she was just hiding her true self behind that facade. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything in my head, her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at me like I was the only one. All lies. Every single one. I didn't even know how to feel. Anger, betrayal, sadness. It was all mixed up and swirling inside me. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I just sat there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her betrayal crush me. I kept thinking about how I was supposed to marry this woman tomorrow, and now, suddenly, nothing felt real anymore. I was lost completely. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My mind was racing, but mostly all I could think about was her. Emily, the woman I was supposed to marry in a few hours. I kept replaying those texts in my head, and it was like I couldn't escape the image of her with Jake. It wasn't just the cheating that hurt. It was the betrayal of trust, of everything we'd built. How could she lie to me so effortlessly? How could she pretend to be this caring, loving wife when she was out there screwing my best friend behind my back? I spent the morning trying to come up with a plan. I knew I couldn't just brush this under the rug, not after everything I'd seen. The thought of walking down the aisle with her, acting like everything was fine, made me sick. I decided I had to confront her before the wedding, face her head on. If she was going to lie her way out of this, I needed to be ready. I brewed some coffee, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited. She was still sleeping, probably exhausted from her late-night rendezvous and all her lies. When she finally woke up, I looked at her differently. There was a flicker of something I couldn't place. Guilt, maybe. But she immediately put on her bitchy mask. "Morning, sweetheart," at giving me that fake smile. "You look tired, rough night." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her with cold eyes. "We need to talk," I told her, voice steady but angry. She looked confused at first, then rolled her eyes and sat up. "What's there to talk about? I slept," I cut her off. "No, Emily, I saw your messages. I know about you and Jake." Her eyes widened and she immediately started to lie, twisting everything. "You must be mistaken. That's not what it looks like." "You're just overthinking." I shook my head, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Stop lying. I saw the texts. For months you've been sneaking around with him, lying to my face every chance you got. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated for a moment, then scoffed. You think I'd cheat on you? Please, you're imagining things. Jake and I are just friends, nothing more. But I knew better. I'd seen the messages. I felt my stomach churn with betrayal. I told her I knew the truth, that I saw the messages, and that no amount of lies could undo what she'd done. She looked furious, defensive, and then just like that she started crying. Not genuine tears, those fake, manipulative tears she'd used to get her way before. I felt my chest tighten. My mind was racing, trying to process this sudden revelation. I'd planned to marry her today. How could I go through with it now? Everything I thought I knew about her was shattered. I kept asking myself if she truly loved me, or if I'd just been fooled from the beginning. My heart ached, but beneath that pain was this overwhelming urge to get revenge, to make her feel what I was feeling right now. I couldn't just vanish into sadness, not without doing something. I needed to make her pay somehow. I wanted her to regret every lie, every betrayal, every moment she spent with Jake behind my back. The rest of the day was a blur. I canceled the wedding, told everyone I was feeling sick, that I needed time to think. But honestly, I already knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without consequences. I spent the hours texting Jake, pretending I was still on his side, planning my move. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind for so long. How many signs had I missed? How many times had she lied to me and I bought every single one? My mind kept circling back to how much she'd lied about everything, her feelings, her fidelity, her respect for me. And I knew this was just the beginning of my revenge, whether she liked it or not. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I felt like I was living someone else's life, like I was watching myself from the outside, trying to piece everything back together. I didn't sleep much, kept thinking about how Emily had played me for a fool, how she'd lied and manipulated me all along. The worst part was the feeling of betrayal, knowing that she'd been sleeping with my best friend, Jake, for months, and I had no clue. It was a punch to the gut every time I remembered the secret texts, the late-night meetings, the way she'd casually lie about where she was going. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew I couldn't just act impulsively. She thought she'd gotten away with it, and part of me wanted to tear her world apart. I started turning her own lies back on her. I told her I was going to confront Jake, that I knew everything and that I was done playing nice. Her face twisted in a kind of bitchy smirk when I told her. She denied everything, of course. You're crazy, she snapped. You're just jealous because I'm better than any woman you've ever had. I couldn't believe how she was twisting it, trying to make me feel like I was the one losing my mind. But I had proof. I had those texts, the screenshots, and I wasn't going to let her deny it anymore. So I made my move. I reached out to Jake, pretending I was still on his side, setting the trap. I told him I wanted to meet up, just the two of us. I needed to see him face to face to get everything out in the open. He was surprised at first, but he played along. We arranged to meet at a quiet bar downtown. I knew Emily would be watching, probably trying to find out what I was up to, but I didn't care. I needed to see Jake's face, hear what he'd say about everything. When Jake arrived, I stared him down. We sat in that dim-lit bar, and I asked him point-blank if he'd been sleeping with my wife. His face turned pale for a second, then he laughed nervously. "Come on, man. It's not what you think," he said, trying to deny everything. I pulled out my phone, showing him the screenshots I had of their texts. His face dropped, and he finally admitted that they'd been seeing each other, sex included, sometimes more than once a week. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. I trusted him with my life, and he'd been screwing my wife behind my back. That was the moment I decided to confront Emily again, this time with everything laid out. I called her right then and told her I knew. I told her I had proof, and I wanted to meet her face to face. She tried to deny it at first, but I could hear the panic in her voice. She blurted out that she loved me, that it was all just a mistake, that she was sorry. Sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it after what she did. Sorry does. Fix months of lies and betrayal. I told her I wanted her to come over so I could look her in the eye and tell her how much she screwed up. I wanted her to see the rage in my eyes, to understand what she'd done. That night she showed up, her face a mask of bitchy arrogance, trying to act like she hadn't done anything wrong. But I saw through her. I saw the guilt, the desperation. I told her I was done. Done pretending I didn't know. Done acting like everything was okay. I told her I'd never trust her again, that I'd never see her the same way after this. Her lies, her manipulations, everything she ever said to me was now shattered. I felt a huge mix of emotions, anger, sadness, heartbreak, and finally, a cold sense of clarity. She had to pay for what she did, and I was going to make sure she did, even if it meant ending everything we had. The betrayal cut deep, but I knew I had to move on. I couldn't keep living in the past, dwelling on what she'd done. I realized I'd been blind to her true nature all along, and that knowledge was the worst kind of heartbreak. But I also knew I had a choice: stay in this mess and be miserable, or cut my losses and start over. I chose the latter. That's where I am now, trying to pick up the pieces, learning how to trust again, and figuring out what comes next. After that night, everything changed. The house that once felt like a home now felt cold and empty. I couldn't sleep in the same bed anymore, not without thinking about her, not without feeling the sting of betrayal every time I closed my eyes. I started packing her things, not out of anger exactly, but more because I knew I couldn't keep living in this fake reality. She had been lying to me for months, sleeping with Jake, and pretending to be the perfect wife. The woman I loved was nothing but a manipulative, bitchy cheat. I spent a lot of time alone, just trying to process everything. I kept going over the texts, the lies, her fake tears. I wondered how I had missed all the signs, how I'd been so blind to her true nature. The heartbreak was overwhelming. I'd trusted her with everything, and she'd thrown it all away for some meaningless sex with Jake. I hated her for it, but I also hated myself for not seeing it sooner. Still, I refused to let her break me completely. I knew I had to do something, some way to get back at her and Jake for messing up my life. That's when I started planning my revenge. I knew I couldn't just walk away and pretend it didn't happen. I needed to make her regret every lie, every moment she spent cheating behind my back. I began by gathering more evidence: screenshots, recordings, anything that could hurt her if I decided to expose her. I also reached out to some of her friends, people who knew her well, to get their perspective on her manipulative side. Turns out, she'd been playing the victim with everyone, pretending to be the innocent wife, but every story I heard was full of lies and betrayal. She was good at hiding the truth, but I was going to expose her. In the meantime, I kept contact with Jake, playing the part of the betrayed husband in my own way. I told him I wasn't going to ruin his life, but I wanted him to understand that I knew everything and that I wasn't going to let this slide. I told him I wanted him to leave her, to see what kind of person she really was. I knew I couldn't confront her directly about what I was planning. I had to be sneaky, calculating. I wanted her to feel vulnerable, to see how it felt to be betrayed the way she betrayed me. I knew that if I was going to do this right, I had to hold back my anger and make everything look like an accident, like it was her who was losing control. So, I set up a few little things. I made sure she'd find some of her own lies exposed, texts from Jake that I'd sent, fake emails I created, little clues that would make her realize I was always one step ahead. I also started dating again, just to remind her that I didn't need her, that I was still a man who could find happiness elsewhere. It wasn't about revenge alone anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. I wanted her to see that I was stronger without her, that her lies and betrayal hadn't broken me. They'd only made me more determined to move on. Looking back, I realize I was angry more than anything. Angry at her, angry at Jake, angry that I'd been so naive. But I also felt a strange sense of relief, like I was finally waking up from this nightmare. The hurt still lingered, but it was fading. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I was done being the naive husband she used to manipulate. From now on, I'd do everything I could to make her regret what she'd done and to rebuild my own life without her in it. Some part of me still hoped she'd come back and try to apologize, but deep down I knew she wouldn't. Not after everything. The days turned into weeks, and I threw myself into rebuilding my life, though the hurt never fully left. I started seeing a therapist, not necessarily to forgive her, but to understand how I'd been so blind for so long. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I was more angry about, her betrayal or myself for not noticing sooner. Every time I thought about how she'd lied so effortlessly, I felt like I was dealing with a stranger, not the woman I'd once loved. She was manipulative, bitchy, and fully capable of lying to my face while sleeping with my best friend. The thought made me sick, but I used that sick feeling to fuel my plan. I kept collecting evidence, building up a case in my mind. I knew that if I wanted her to feel the sting of her own betrayal, I had to be precise. I set up a few situations to catch her off guard. I made sure she'd find some of her own lies exposed, texts, secret emails, maybe even some fake social media messages I created just to make her realize how badly she had screwed up. I was careful, calculated. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing I was behind it all at first. I wanted her to think she was losing control, that her manipulations had backfired. Meanwhile, I started dating again, just casually, to remind myself I had options. It wasn't about revenge alone anymore, but about reclaiming my self-respect. I told myself that she had lost the right to be part of my life after what she'd done. Every flirt, every new connection was a small victory, proof that I didn't need her, that I was better off without her. I also made a few subtle moves to make her jealous, sending her messages with women I'd met, making her see that I was still desirable, still in control. The last thing I wanted was for her to think she'd broken me. No, I was more determined than ever to come out of this stronger. One night, I set up a situation where I knew she'd stumble into her own lies. I left my phone lying around, loaded with a few more clues, just enough to make her realize she'd been caught in her own game. I wanted her to see that I knew everything, that I was always one step ahead. When she finally confronted me, face flushed, eyes wide with panic, I just looked at her and said, "You lied to my face for months. You cheated, you manipulated, and you thought you could get away with it. But I know the truth now, Emily, and I'm not going to let you ruin me anymore." Her bitchy attitude crumbled a little then, replaced by a mix of anger and fear. She started crying again, but it was different this time. It wasn't fake tears. It was real tears, the kind that come after you've been caught. She looked at me with that fake innocence she always tried to wear, but I didn't buy it anymore. I told her I was done, that I was going to tell everyone the truth if she kept lying. I knew it wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about setting myself free from her lies and manipulation. I wanted her to feel what it was like to be truly exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. That night, I felt a strange mix of relief and determination. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I wouldn't let her dictate my life anymore. I'd spent too long trusting a woman who was only out for herself. Now, I was taking control. I was going to rebuild, stronger and more aware than before. I learned a lot from this, about trust, deception, and the importance of watching out for red flags. Most of all, I learned that some women, no matter how bitchy or manipulative, don't deserve a place in your life once they've crossed the line, and I was done being the naive husband, sitting quietly while she played her games. I was ready for whatever came next, alone if I had to be, but free. Free from her lies, her betrayal, and her bitchy manipulations. In the end, I decided to cut all ties. I told her she was no longer welcome in my life, and I blocked her everywhere, social media, phone, everything. I didn't want any remnants of her lies lingering around. The house I once thought was our future now felt like a prison, so I moved out. I found a small apartment nearby and started the painful process of rebuilding from scratch. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I knew I couldn't stay where I was, surrounded by her betrayal. Looking back, I realize how much this has changed me. I used to be naive, trusting blindly, believing love could conquer everything. But now I see that some people are just manipulative, selfish, and good at hiding who they truly are. Emily was one of those women. She played her game well, lying and cheating behind my back, all while acting like the innocent victim. I let her manipulate me for a while, but once I found out the truth, I refused to be a victim anymore. I took back control, even if it hurt like hell. The betrayal hurt, but it also forced me to wake up. I learned to trust my instincts better, to read the signs I'd ignored for too long. I learned that sometimes love isn't enough, especially when the other person is only pretending to care. I've come to see this as a painful but necessary lesson. It's taught me that I deserve honesty, respect, and loyalty. And if someone can't give me that, then they're not worth my time. Now I focus on myself. I work out, spend time with friends, and try to find happiness again. The pain still lingers sometimes, but I refuse to wallow in it. I know I'll heal, even if it takes time. What I want to share with anyone reading this is simple. Don't ignore the red flags. Don't be naive about how manipulative people can be. And most importantly, don't let anyone, no matter how bitchy or charming they seem, destroy your sense of self. If you find yourself in a situation like mine, confront it head on, take control. Because in the end, your happiness and self-respect are all that really matter.